Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Sharonna Allahyar. Today we are going to be talking about monogamy. People want to find that perfect soulmate, but we all have vastly different expectations for what that means, especially living in a diverse and fast-moving multicultural society like Los Angeles. Is monogamy too much to expect from a relationship? And how do media and people's ethnic and cultural backgrounds influence their expectations and their behavior? Joining me today to discuss the issue are CSUN Communication Studies Professor Randi Picarelli and CSUN Communication Studies Professor Jim Hasenauer. Both are experts in gender roles and relationships. Thank you for joining me. Before we get started, I want to show you some interviews I conducted with people in the San Fernando Valley about their views on monogamy.
When they say there's a lot of fish in the sea, there really is, you know. So for any person, man or woman, it's hard to comprehend the thought of monogamy.
If you're looking for something and you're going from one partner to another at a time, I definitely feel that dating multiple people at once and just getting a broader perspective is the best way to go about it.
I've had a friend of mine who's dated two people at the same time. But as far as I go, I'm pretty strict about being faithful to your partner. I'm pretty strict about, doing the best you can in the relationship that you're in.
I would say that it's a lot of immaturity. People, I think when they're older, are more ready to settle down and be monogamous and be faithful. And I think when you're younger, it's just about experience.
Being with the same sexual partner, that's not a problem anymore. We have condoms. We have a lot of contraceptions that keep us safe nowadays. So yeah, back in the day, I might have been be monogamous just because it's safe for you. There's a lot of diseases going out there, but we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Professor Picarelli, why do you think so many people contemplate the ins and outs of monogamy?
I don't know that so many people do contemplate the ins and outs of monogamy. I think that our path to monogamy might vary, but I think ultimately most people want monogamous relationships. So even in these clips, we saw some students or various interviewees talking about the path to monogamy, whether or not we date several people at a time, et cetera. But it seemed like monogamy was still the end goal in several of those interviews. So I think that whether or not people are dating multiple partners at a time or whether or not they're exclusive in their dating relationships, it seems that we're still moving on this kind of trajectory, if you will, to a monogamous relationship ultimately as kind of the brass ring or the prize.
Any thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, well, I think Randy said it, the notion of relational trajectory. Nobody begins a relationship or begins dating as monogamous with that person. So it's kind of a stage or kind of a turning point in the relationship that comes later. In any romantic relationship, people are going to have to really kind of decide and communicate about the relationship issues. Those questions on how is this going to work, and here's what I want in the relationship, and what do you need in the relationship. And so the question of monogamy or exclusivity is definitely going to come up in any romantic relationship, but it doesn't come up at the beginning. And it seems like these interviewees were really talking about the early stages of a relationship.
Okay, and do you think is California singled out for having a promiscuous and free lifestyle compared to other parts of the country?
I don't know. Maybe because of the media saturation here, and which tends to kind of exaggerate sexual behavior and sexual activity and such. Maybe that's the image of California that goes out into the world. But I think if you actually look at all the people who live here who are trying to manage their romantic relationships, we're probably no more or no less monogamous nor promiscuous than any place else. Really, one thing to think about maybe is that there's kind of sexual behavior, and then there's the meaning of sexual behavior. What does that really count as in the relationship? And so questions about monogamy or what consensual sexuality means in a romantic relationship, that's kind of the most important point. And if the people have kind of mutuality about that definition, then the relationship can kind of proceed. But if people have different expectations, then it's really going to be problematic.
Well, I think to touch upon what Jim said, but also what your original question was about whether or not it's different in Los Angeles than other places in the country, I think not Los Angeles. I don't think that Los Angeles is a unique culture in itself, but I think that urban areas, you see different patterns of dating in urban areas than you would in rural areas, meaning that in large kind of, where there are large concentrations of people, New York City, Miami, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, Chicago, etc., you've got younger, more active communities, right? The cities are full of younger people who tend to move away when it's time to stabilize, right? Marry, have children, or settle down, even in homosexual relationships, participate in the same behavior. So you see different dating trends in the cities than you do in the suburbs and in rural areas. And I think, Los Angeles might be unique in that we have, as you mentioned, more cultural diversity than many places in the country. We're also a younger city, and I think it's important what Jim said, that we are a city that is founded on kind of entertainment and to some degree superficiality, so that might influence dating patterns as well.
Okay, and do you think is long-term fidelity so hard for individuals?
Well, I want to turn that question over to my colleague here, who's been in a monogamous relationship for decades. But prior to doing that, I do want to say I don't know. I haven't done that yet. But I think that fidelity, I think that monogamy used to mean something different, and that marriage and long-term monogamous relationships were often about practicality, about families merging, about money merging, socioeconomics, about land, amassing land, etc. And that for a lot of reasons we stayed monogamous or we stayed faithful to our partners because we didn't have the right not to. And I think that those trends are changing to some degree as women become more empowered. The women's rights movement has certainly done a lot for divorce rights. Both men and women are putting off the age of marriage until later, so we see that there is kind of more decisiveness maybe about marrying in the first place. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think you're right that really one of the really big changes are changes in the status of women, and women coming to romantic relationships more as equal partners rather than as only kind of stuck in the traditional predictable roles. So so I think that's really important. What it comes down to is that notion of what does it mean? And so in any relationship, the people are certainly going to reach a point to say, okay, what do we have here? What kind of relationship is this? And a relationship that's kind of open, and a relationship where people are still seeing others and dating others, both parties might be really comfortable with that down in the early stages. You couldn't make a claim on somebody else to, we just met, it was a great date, let's be monogamous. So, but later on, when you really feel that you've found someone that you want to make a commitment to and you want to build a life with, so then the meaning of exclusivity. What does it mean to say you're going to be my partner? I want you to be my romantic partner, and I will not I will not take others, and that's if that becomes the deal of the marriage, and that's that is kind of the assumption in a lot of marriage relationships, but not all, but I'd say most, then it becomes a manageable, practical thing. It's actually easier in lots of ways. It's really hard to juggle commitments and emotional attachments and time. There's only so many Friday and Saturday nights, so it's hard for people to live kind of sexually active relationships with a number of partners, as opposed to putting the energy and the time into building a relationship with one person.
Do you think gender has something to do with it as far as participating in casual dating? Do you think there's a difference between the two, female, male?
I do, especially in the early days. Males are more sexually active. Males are more likely to have more sexual partners. For a long time, there was really a double standard about that. A woman who participated at that level was really looked down upon, and and there were names and such. Now I think that's actually kind of changing. But males are more kind of seeing sexuality as something to be obtained, something to accomplish in their dating patterns. There's a lot of just ordinary talk about that, and I think that part of the traditionally feminine socialization is to realize that sexuality has a greater significance. The risk of pregnancy, even though there's great contraception techniques, people still have unwanted pregnancies. The risk of STDs and HIV, so women have more to lose in lots of ways, and that kind of caution and the emotional caution of once one makes an attachment in a relationship, and then to feel that commitment's been broken, and can you trust the other person, and those kinds of things. So I think there is still a sex difference.
Well, and I want to touch on something. I think just so we can frame this, kind of statistically, rates of fidelity haven't changed much in the last 50 years among men, right? So the number of men that were cheating in the 1950s is very similar or comparable to the number of men who are cheating in the new millennium. What has changed are the number of women who are unfaithful, and that largely has to do with, again, as mentioned, women's rights, that women are staving off relationships until later, women's empowerment in the workplace, but really women's exposure, that the public sphere, we go out of the home now in ways that we didn't before. So our exposure to others is so much broader, if you will, than it was 50 years ago when we really kind of knew our neighbors, but we're isolated to some degree. So now there are opportunities, I think, for women, and I don't mean to make that sound like a valuable thing or a desirable thing, but opportunities for women to be unfaithful. When you asked about fidelity and whether it was gendered, I think that's kind of what comes up for me.
But freedom is a desirable thing, and so women now have a kind of a greater freedom to make their own choices in the way that men had that freedom before. So
well said.
They can still make the wrong choice maybe, or live with the consequences of what they thought were good choices and turned out not to be.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see what some people had to say about their culture and how it affects the way they view relationships.
People who are here tend to be more strict about marriage than people back home sometimes. And in that people over here are like more cultured. When you stay away from your country, you tend to miss things back home, and that's things that are back home are more dear to you, right? So it's that same thing that in terms of marriage as well. So you allow parents to help you find a girl. In some cases, you let parents decide who the girl is going to be for you, or the other way around. And if I know that people from back home don't have this problem sometimes.
Like my mother, along with her sort of being a little bit racist. I don't want to say she's racist, but a tad bit. She's also a homophobe, and my ex-girlfriend was half black, half Chinese, and it was a big problem. My mom, wanted me to date a boy, but let alone somebody who's a mixed race, it was a big deal, and I dealt with a lot of turmoil for that. And I just went balls to the wall, and I told her, I'm in love with this person, and it's not going to change, and she's just going to have to deal with it.
I'm still brought up in like a really traditional family, and like the only influence I would say that they have on me is just like kind of dating responsibly, dating like not just dating around, just kind of like making sure that the person that you're seeing has like a future, like kind of like husband material, or like there's something like worthwhile to it.
I am very orthodox in my beliefs and the way I do things. The way I was raised, my parents raised me that way. They've been like that their entire lives. They don't know anything else. I'm first generation here in America. I'm first person born here. So definitely, being Egyptian definitely helped. The way they raised me, the people I'm around church with, the fact that I do go to church has kept me monogamous.
When you are in a serious relationship in Belgium, you're not going to go only with your friend to Ibiza or to Saint-Tropez, that is like the single destination, You just pick like a destination, like not like boring, you can have fun too, but this is like the two destination for like single people. And when you're in a relationship, you just avoid this. And here is like Vegas, Miami, and even I realized that the girls are okay with that, because I think like they just used to see like guys going over there is like a regular destination, and that's how it works. Like, I don't know, it's different.
And Jim, how do you think culture plays a role in people's dating lives?
Well, we learn our scripts for all of our relationships inside our culture, kind of first from our family and then in the broader culture. So it's really interesting to see, some of these kind of immigrant students or students who come from who are children of immigrants, where those kind of traditional culture values are in play. And I think a really interesting case was the arranged marriage example, because that was the model for most of the world for most history. So this idea of a romantic pair bond, you know, finding a partner and creating an egalitarian new relationship based on romantic love, that's a relatively new phenomenon that comes in the United States and kind of Western culture. So it really makes a big difference in terms of what people's expectations are and what they think the relational trajectory should be. Dating, courtship, exclusivity, bonding in some cases, or this is the girl you're going to marry, this is the boy you're going to marry, and it'll be a good match because our families are compatible and such.
Right. And what do you think about that? How much influence do you think friends, culture,
Well,
has to do with it?
I think those are two drastically different questions, whether or not our peers influence our behavior,
Right.
or whether or not culture does. But to address the culture question, which I think is rich for analysis, several of the students mentioned a religious background. And regardless, if we just want to make generalizations and just kind of look geographically at the globe, I can think of no kind of generalized other that doesn't value a monogamous relationship ultimately, right? And that's largely steeped in the world's kind of 5 primary religions. And whether it's Judaism or Islam or Christianity, that monogamy is practiced in and valued in all of those religions. So regardless of kind of where we come from in the world or how progressive or conservative we are in our culture, as members of our culture, we still seem to value fidelity, monogamy as an ideal. Whether or not we're able, you asked earlier about fidelity, whether or not we're able to live up to that standard, we still understand that as kind of, as human beings, as kind of what is best for our society. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you a question. Under Islamic law, you can have up to 4 wives. So all the Islamic countries recognize polygamy. These countries include Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and many others. So why do you think it is illegal in the U.S. if some people participate in open relationships and infidelity in marriages?
Well, if the society and the religion allows for polygamy, then it's not infidelity, right? It's kind of allowed inside the meaning and inside the religious ideology, you know, of that group of people. But the question of, you know, why does the government or why does society or why does culture care? I think it's really about stability. That the larger society wants to maintain stability, and monogamy in marriage is definitely a stabilizing kind of influence in terms of economics, in terms of child care, in terms of, you know, kind of a number of things. And in a society which practices polygamy, which is, you know, kind of can be a bonded official relationship before the world, you know. So now we have 2 partners. That too would be stable. The really interesting question is the double standard issue. You know, why is it that polygamy and men can have more than 1 wives in all these cultures, and a woman would be stoned for adultery? And you know, so definitely culture really makes a difference. But some of it has to do with the status of males and the status of women, and that it needs to be looked at. But if polygamy is allowed, then it's no longer infidelity. You know, infidelity is kind of like breaking the rules of what the marriage arrangement is.
Did you have any thoughts?
Well, I would also make the point that it needs to be mentioned that even in cultures that allow for polygamy, that the majority of people still don't practice that they seem to be finding themselves in exclusive monogamous relationships. So it doesn't seem to, I don't know whether it's just, as you mentioned earlier, that it's difficult to manage, that it's not practical, or that it's not what people really want. I think that the cases of polygamists kind of globally in cultures that allow that seem to be the minority in terms of numbers.
Okay. And let's take a look at some answers people gave regarding media influencing their dating lives.
See, no one wants to see boring married couples on TV. They want to see the young kids that go out, club this, you know, I just hooked up with her, that type of thing. Especially with Jersey Shore, the entire thing is about them partying and going from drinking to trying to get girls back to the house, and that's same episode, just different day.
Girls of like eating, talking, being so open about like sex and having like a one night stand, like. In Belgium, it's really not that way. Even in France, I'm telling you, because in Belgium we're watching a lot of French TV, because we're speaking French too, and we don't have this kind of show. The only show we have like that are coming from the America.
It really gives you a different perspective on relationships, and in a way makes you want to try what they're doing, you know, because it seems fun and it looks fun, you're having a good time, and so why can't you?
A lot of rap, especially, for instance, especially like mainstream rap, just about like, oh yeah, I have like these many hoes or these many blah blah. Like, it just feels like they kind of like promote polygamy, where they promote where it's just like, yeah, I can date multiple people, or I can have like multiple partners and it'll be okay.
I work at clubs especially, and I mean, we even have certain rules, like to even come into the club. There is a rule that says, you know, like you can't wear shorts, you know, you can't wear backwards hats, and you can't wear Affliction and Ed Hardy. That's an actual rule. We can't get in because it's too much like Jersey Shore, and it's too much like those kind of things that we see on TV, and it's a turn off. So we don't even allow people to come in that are wearing that type of stuff. So yeah, I see it a lot around me, but I try not to base my own life on that.
Movies try to, you know, present relationships in good light and spread the good word all the time. There's always, you know, the casualness and the monogamous nature that people tend to, like, you know, follow.
And Randi, how do you think media influences relationships and dating in America?
I think in several ways. I think the students and your interviewees were addressing a couple different topics, and one is the idea of monogamy. And I often tell my students that, you know, media can't sell us real love. They can't package real love for us. So, you know, I think the first interviewee said, you know, we don't want to see boring couples, and that's absolutely true. I mean, it can't be, there's no kind of material incentive or monetary incentive to showing a relationship that's endured for decades, right? Showing us kind of behind closed doors, watching television or doing our chores together. So what media can sell us is romance or romantic, you know, infatuation as love. And I think that greatly influences young people's expectations, which I also think inevitably leads to the demise of many relationships, meaning, you know, a couple years in, I don't feel like I'm in love anymore. The spark has gone away. You know, there's no chemistry, or the romance has died. And because we've so connected the idea of romance, you know, champagne and rose petals and bubble baths and vacations as love, that when those gestures are gone, when the initial stages of that kind of heightened passion are gone, we don't think that we're in love anymore. And that can often lead to infidelity or to the demise of a relationship, you know, a breakup. So I think that has an influence. And then the second part would be what these young people were talking about, which is just the hypersexuality in all aspects of media. But I think, you know, the topic of your show is about monogamy, and I think even when we see these examples of a lot of promiscuity, especially in MTV and a lot of the kind of CW shows, we see it as bad behavior that we as the audience kind of voyeuristically judge. In other words, they're not doing monogamy right. They haven't gotten there yet, but they will. You know, they'll grow up. Somebody earlier said it's immature. They'll grow up, and then they'll settle down.
And do you think it influences the way people should act?
Well, I think that people think that it's real. There's this kind of reflection hypothesis that, oh, so I should be, that's the life I should have that, you know, I see on Jersey Shore, or I see on some other show, and it's obviously not. It's mediated, so it's compact, it's hyper dramatic, it's hyper sexualized, it's nobody's real life. And if that kind of becomes the model for people thinking about their romantic relationships and about their own sexuality, it can get just really, really confusing. There's a great book by Ariel Levy called Raunch Culture, and or it's called Female Chauvinist Pigs, and then Raunch Culture, and it really looks at media representations with this one kind of sexuality, which is this kind of like sexually promiscuous, open, go for it, girls gone wild, and people kind of mistake that for sexuality. And really, sexuality in a relationship is way more complicated, is way more than just the behavior. It's got to do with the meanings, it's got to do with the emotional attachments. It's way more complicated, and so that's the kind of thing that people really need to, you know, kind of like work out together. And I think the media really kind of distorts, and young people especially, it's all entertainment, but young people especially kind of think that that's the way it is, and that's the way their lives should be. And I think that's not so great.
Okay. And you've heard the saying, a relationship with no strings attached. And now people talk about friends with benefits. Let's see what our interview subjects had to say about that kind of relationship.
I know people do it a lot. It's just not out in the open as much.
I have dated 2 or 3 women at once with their knowledge, and it worked out completely fine. If anything, there's actually one of them who was also dating other women while I was dating her.
It's extremely common, especially with our generation and our age group. I will say that it never works out. I mean, very rarely. It is a rarity if it does, but there's always somebody that's gonna fall in love or develop feelings or develop that attachment, and they're screwed.
We're all human, and there are those needs for physical interaction, and women need it just as much as guys do. So friends with benefits really works out in our society.
I feel like that just gets tricky, and I feel like if you don't want the person as like a relationship, you maybe shouldn't even be involved in it. Like personally for me, I don't do it. Like I don't feel like if I don't like the person, if I don't see a future with them, I personally would not get physically involved with them, because that's just gonna like mess things up and get really, really bad really quick.
So, do you think friends with benefits works?
I think friends with benefits can work for people. Once again, it's mutuality relationship definition. We're talking about young single people, they don't have other commitments, and so if they're comfortable with it and if it's consensual, it might be absolutely fine. One of the things that I think really happens a lot with friends and benefits is the impact of drugs and alcohol. I mean, to engage in a sexual relationship with someone, or a sexual encounter with someone, or to have a relationship with someone, that should be a conscious choice. That's something where, all right, I'm choosing to do this. And I think lots of times it's just kind of under the fog of alcohol that people are sexually excited and they see the opportunity, and it seems easier than not doing it in some ways. And that's not so great. But it's definitely, it's an okay thing if it's consensual.
What do you think, Randi?
I think it's nice in theory. I think that the notion of friends with benefits, several of these interviewees said, ultimately it works out. And I would question what he means by, or what they mean by working out. Does it mean that the friendship is maintained, and that after the benefits portion is over, that the friendship stays viable and intact and as something that both partners value? Does it mean that it works out because we move towards some kind of romantic relationship, or simply that we went on our own ways? In other words, there's kind of, I question what that person meant by ultimately they're successful. You get a friend and you have a romantic or a sexual relationship. I can see the perks, but I think it's much, much nicer in theory than it is in practical application.
Those are different kinds of relationships, so it gets complicated.
What do you predict will happen in the future as far as dating and monogamous relationships go and all?
I don't think we're going to see any great changes. I think that the trajectory, the expectation has been very similar. I think we'll see different rituals in dating in terms of courtship and how people do the dating game, particularly with the use of texting and other forms of technology, more in urban areas, more hanging out than one partner driving to another's door, introducing themselves to the parents and taking somebody out for a period of time. But in terms of the arc or the expected kind of course of the relationship, I don't think we'll see great changes. I think that both heterosexual and homosexual individuals seem to want to favor monogamy as the goal.
Randi, Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching On Point. I'm Sharonna Allahyar.
People are going to want to have deep relationships with other people, and getting there is hard. You meet a lot of people, you think that someone's the right person, and it turns out to not really work out. So I think that the dating and the experimentation and all is going to really kind of continue, but ultimately people are really going to be searching for that one other to build a life with.